Hello, 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 hello. Good day, good day, good day. Hi, good evening, everyone. How are you all doing? So, you're welcome to week three. Oh my goodness, week three. Week three of our series tagged Parenting Effectively with Emotional Intelligence. Week one, we spoke about what emotional intelligence is. We spoke about all the five components of emotional intelligence. We spoke about why emotional intelligence is important in parenting. While week two was all about self awareness, identifying your identifying your triggers, identifying patterns, identifying things that get you upset. That was week two. Week two was all about you getting to know yourself, getting to know what are your body cues, getting to know the things that triggers you, getting to know the patterns that gets you to lose control, especially when you're around your children. And this is week three. Yes, yes, yes. Week three is all about self regulation and empathy. So, for those of you who are just joining, my name is Oluwatoyin Ogunkomi. My husband said he loves the way I say my name. My name is Oluwatoyin Ogunkomi, and today we're continuing our series tagged Parenting Effectively with Emotional Intelligence. And like I said, this week is all about self-regulation and empathy. So, how many of you have seen the video that's trend? In fact, this week, a lot of emotional, a lot of things that had to do with emotional intelligence was just trending online. The first had to do with the minister of FCT, and how he lost his cool around a soldier, and he was just all over the place, calling the guy a fool, and the guy just maintained his cool and all that. Then the second um video that was trending, I think started trending yesterday and today, is about the parents who went to the school to beat up the teacher because the teacher slapped their son that pushed the teacher. And all this was just simply showing us that emotional intelligence is not intelligent, as emotional intelligence is not common. Thank you so much, Faith, for joining. Thanks so much for joining. Emotional intelligence is not common. That's one thing we need to know. Emotional intelligence is not something that is easy to do. And that's why, as parents, you need to learn how to manage and control your emotions so you don't go around hitting other people's children. You don't go around fighting with people. You don't go around insulting and losing your cool in public, even in your home as a parent. I know most times anything you see your child or your children doing outside, it's obvious they've learned that from home, you know. So imagine the child that was pushing the teacher, probably learned that at home. So as parents, how can we manage? How can we regulate our emotion? So we started last week. Last week we spoke about emotional awareness, how you can identify what are the things triggering you, and when you're able to identify these things, that is step one in emotional intelligence. You being able to identify your triggers, you being able to identify your emotions, you being able to identify your body cues and all that. Now that you've identified these things, what do you do? Are you just going to fold your hands and start looking at yourself or start looking at no. So there are things you need to do, and these things are what we call emotional regulation. And when we talk of emotional regulation, what really is emotional regulation? Very simple. Emotional regulation is your ability to move from a disempowering emotional state into an empowering emotional state. And this is another process. So, like I said, emotional intelligence is your superpower as a parent. Emotional intelligence is your superpower as a boss. Emotional intelligence is your superpower as an employee or as an employer. We all need emotional intelligence because with emotional intelligence, we can go far. So, what is emotion? What is self-regulation? Like I said self-regulation is your ability to move from one emotional state to another emotional state. It's your ability to pause before reacting. His ability to choose your response over reaction. It's your ability to manage your tone, your body language, and your emotional energy. That is what emotional regulation is. Now, why does emotional regulation matter, or why is it matter? Why does it matters in parenting? One of the things you need to know about emotional regulation, it prevents the situation from escalating. Your ability to move from one emotional state, a disempowering emotional state, to an empowering emotional state will prevent issues from escalating. Another reason in emotional regulation is another reason self-regulation is important is that as you are learning to control yourself, as you're exhibiting that control, your children are also learning from you. Then self-regulation also supports cooperation and your psychological safety. I'm going to talk about what happens when you're in an emotional state. I'm going to talk about that when I'm done with this. So it supports your cooperation. It supports cooperation of your children or the people around you, and also it supports your psychological safety. Then another reason self-regulation is important is that it improves the discipline outcome. What are the things you want to achieve when it comes to discipline with your children? It really, really helps a lot. Now, as parents, we need to know that self-regulation, or some people also call it emotional regulation, is very, very important because it helps you to it helps you to it calms you down. It helps you to take responsibility for how you respond. So I wrote some things down here. I said being emotionally intelligent is not about you ignoring your emotions or suppressing them, but it has to do with you experiencing those emotions in a safe space. Remember when I said one of the reasons for emotional regulation is that gives you it supports your psychological safety. Now, I said here that being emotionally intelligent is not about ignoring your emotions, it's not about suppressing your emotion. Rather, it's about you experiencing these emotions. Because if you suppress your emotion, if you repress this emotion, guess what? The emotion stays in the body and stays in the body as either a physical illness. Yes, I'm sure most of you might have heard of psychosomatic symptoms. This is when somebody is sick, but that illness cannot be traced to any physiological reason, right? Oh, thank you so much, Faith. Oh, Faith, thank you so much. So thank you. So she says emotional regulation is the ability to choose response over reaction. Thank you so much. Ability is also to prevent situations from escalating. Thank you so much, Faith, for being our scribe for today. So, like I said, your ability to manage your you being emotionally intelligent is not about you ignoring your emotion. It's not about you suppressing your emotion. Rather, it's about you experiencing the emotion and being able to navigate your response and navigate how you feel, meaning that you're moving from one emotional state to another emotional state. And I said when you suppress or when you repress your emotion, that this emotion stays in the body and stays in the body as a physical illness or as depression in some cases. Now, I don't know if you've heard of psychosomatic symptoms. Psychosomatic symptoms are those symptoms that are so those things you experience that mimics a physical illness but has no trace to a physical illness. Rather, the trace to that what is happening to you is linked to a psychological reaction, psychological incident. Now, as parents, it's very important that we know how to we have to learn how to regulate this our emotion. So the first thing when it comes to self-regulation as parents is that you have to pause. When you find yourself in that emotional state and you know that this state, if you don't this state, if you continue, it's going to cause trouble, it's going to cause negative things happening, or you're going to lose it. The first thing you need to do is you need to learn how to pause. Pause. Very important. Now, I gave an example last week when I did the training last week when I spoke about emotional awareness. When I gave the scenario of whereby imagine you had a very tough day at work, and on getting back home, you now saw your house in disarray, everywhere, shoes scattered, bags scattered, and play everything's disarranged. Then what would you do? And I said that time when I was not emotionally intelligent, what I did was I just started screaming. I just went ballistic. I was just shout. And at that point, like I said, I wasn't emotionally intelligent. But what would you do now that you are learning about emotional intelligence? And now that we're learning about self regulation, the first thing you need to do in any scenario, in any situation that is beyond you, that you know that this situation is a trigger, is for you to pause. You have to learn to pause. When you pause, it helps you to, you pausing is like the reason you're pausing is because you want to think, what is the next action that I need to take? Because if you do not pause, hey, if you do not pause, the next thing you will do is that you will start um vibrating, you start getting upset. Thank you, living beyond limitation. Yes, suppressing your emotions can actually lead to physical illness. Yes, and that's why we have people having depression, we have people having panic attack and all that. Yes, it does. Thank you so much. So the first thing we need to do when it comes to emotional regulation is to pause. When you pause, what do you do within those few minutes of you pausing? Number one, take a deep breath. So I'm going into the practical of what you can do. I'm going to stop and go back to continue into the session. So the first thing to do is to pause. When you pause, you need to take a deep breath. When you're taking a deep breath, you take a deep breath, you count a few 4 seconds, all the breath, 4 seconds, then you exhale from your mouth. When you do this, I know it's you, Daniela. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know it's you. When you do this, you taking in the deep breath, you breathing in, holding it, and releasing it. It's helping you to change your emotional state. It helps you to calm down. And for people who don't, so what happens when we get triggered? Four things happen to us when we get triggered. And that's why we need to have always learn how to pause. So what are the four things that happens to us when we get triggered? The first thing is that is either we freeze, we we fight, we flee, or we fawn. One of the things we need to know, when our brain perceive that there's a threat, maybe a physical, emotional, or psychological threat, our nervous system, triggers the automatic survival mode. And what happens here is you either freeze. When I say you freeze, it's either when you freeze, you shut down. And shut down means you're just going silent. You're not in control of yourself anymore. You're just numb. You're just staring into space. You're not able to act. When you see some scenarios when people are actually shutting down and they freeze, they're not acting. Then for some people, they fight. And what do I mean by fight? They want to confront the threat. And that's what happens to parents. Your child has done something. The first thing that comes to your mind is you want to shout at the child. What is this? Why would you do this? No, 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 no. And we go just go on and on and on and on. For some other people, they start arguing. For some other people, they become defensive. For some other people, they try to take control of the situation. Why? Like the scenario I gave, that I came home, I saw my house disarranged. I went straight into fight mode. And what was my fight mode? I was shouting and I was trying to control the situation. Who kept this here? Who kept that there? Okay, you pick this. You pick that. I was not in control of my emotion. And most times when we're in that state, the part of the brain that we use for reasoning, guess what happens? It's being hijacked by the emotional part of the brain. And that's why it's important that you learn to pause first. If you don't learn to pause, you just go into either fight mode, freeze mode, or flight. Now, what is flight mode? Flight is when you are, I just need to get out of this place. I just need to get out of this. So you now avoid that situation, or you try to escape emotionally or physically, or you just shut down. You don't even talk to your children again. I know for some children, when they find themselves in this case situation, they just shut their door. They stay in their room. They don't come out, or they avoid eye contact. This feeling of I just need to escape. Now, when we talk of fun is FAWN. This is like I must just go to my safe place. Please, I need to go to my safe place. And people in this situation, you see them either over apologize, okay, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, or they're avoiding conflict by okay, no problem. Well, that's what you want, no problem. Or they try to please, they go into people pleasing mode, saying I'm sorry too often and all that. Now, why is this important? Why do you need to understand this fight, flight, freeze, and fun mode? Is that as parents, you might find yourself going into any of these emotional states. And like I said when I started, I said that when when you find yourself in an emotional state, what happens is that when you find yourself when you encounter a trigger, what happens is that your emotional brain hijacks the rational thinking part of the brain, and that's why you need to pause. That's why you need to take your in deep breath. That's why you need to either take yourself out of that scenario and take this self-soothing you start learning how to you just start self-soothing, calming yourself down. When I talk about self-soothing, you have to start learning how to calm yourself down. And for parents, if you don't learn how to calm yourself down, you go either into a fight mode or you go into a flight mode. Now, one thing I need you to know as parents is that every misbehavior is a feedback. Every misbehavior from your child is a feedback. Now, your children most times are not out to get you. I need you to know that. Sorry, excuse me, please. Most times our children, excuse me, most times our children misbehave. It's a feedback that either an emotion or an emotional need has not been met, or the child has not learnt a skill, or the child has not has emotions that are tangled and needs to learn how to express those emotions. And as parents, when your children exhibit this, you know when your children exhibit these behaviors that get you into that hyper or angry or disappointing state, it's very important that you learn or you go into what we call emotional regulation. You have to learn how to regulate your emotion. I wrote here that every misbehavior is a feedback for how they feel, a feedback on for unmet needs, a feedback of for unlearned skill. So for every time your child misbehaves, it's either if the child has not learned something, or the child has unmet needs, or there is a way of your child just expressing himself or herself. And that's why it's important as parents that we also learn how to express ourselves appropriately, so that we don't go around slapping other people. We don't go around calling people fool. We don't go around engaging in some negative behavior, because our children are actually learning from us, and because they're learning from us, this is what they'll go and do outside. Now, back to emotional regulation. Why is emotional regulation important? I've spoken about that. I said that if you don't learn how to manage or regulate your emotion, and all you do is just suppressing your emotion, these emotions will be stored in your body. And when these emotions are stored in your body, it can form either sickness or a psychological state. Now, another thing we need to know as parents is that it is your responsibility to learn how to regulate your emotion. And that's why when we talk about emotional intelligence, we say it's your ability to identify your triggers, your ability to identify your emotions, your ability to know what is happening, your body cues and all that. Sorry, minute, please. To know your body cues is your ability to regulate and manage yourself. So not just you identifying your emotion, you also have to learn how to manage those emotions so that you don't go around slapping other people's faces or calling people fools. So back to my yes, thank you so much, Faith. Thank you so much for parents must learn to express themselves appropriately. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, what do we do when it comes to self-regulation? What are the tools we need? Number one, you have to learn to pause. That was what I started with. I say you have to learn to pause. When you pause, you drop everything you're doing and go into, what I so when you pause, you just tell yourself, what am I feeling? What is going through me? You pause. Internally you pause, then what do? You stop what you're doing internally. So just instead of you just charging at your child or trying to shout, just pause, then take deep breath, breathe in and breathe out. In the process of you breathing in and breathing out, guess what happens? You start regulating your breathing. It also helps you to calm down. Now, another thing we need to do as parents is we need to choose love. I know it's difficult. Your child has done something really angry, really annoying, but you have to make that conscious choice to respond with love and not to react. I know it's difficult, but guess what? With practice, you get used to it. So when I say you have to choose love, choose to respond rather than to react. You have to make that conscious choice to react, to respond, not to react. Another thing we need to do as parents is we don't learn how to change what you're thinking. Most times we react to what our children have done is because that thing that they've triggered in us most times is from something that has happened in the past. So your child is rude to you. It could be a trigger to you not being important, or maybe someone or you not someone being rude to you, someone talking to you in a certain way. It could be a trigger to what has happened to you in the past. Now, as parents, you need to understand that when you're triggered by when your child or when somebody triggers you and makes you feel, like I say, it's triggering a past event. When that past event comes to mind, there are things you tell yourself, and most times those things are negative. So let me give you an example. A parent that grew up in a home whereby the father was always shouting, you know, the father is always shouting and all that. And guess what? The so let's say it's the mother now, and the woman gets married, and the husband starts shouting. You know, unconsciously, the woman might react negatively to the husband, as in, "Why are you shouting at me? Don't talk to me like that." Da, 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 da. And the husband will like, "What did I say? What has happened? Why are you reacting like this?" Unknown to the husband, the way he shouted or the words he used might have triggered some unresolved emotional trauma or some unresolved issues. And that's why, as parents, it's important that we learn to unpack our emotional backpack before we start having children. We have to learn to unpack our emotional backpack, because when you don't unpack this emotional backpack, a current situation might trigger an old need or an old wound. And that's why we tend to react in ways that ordinarily you shouldn't have reacted like that. So, back to the first step I said is you need to pause. You have to learn to pause. Second step is you need to determine to choose to respond with love rather than to react. Then the third is you need to change what you're telling yourself. What are you telling yourself in your mind? Reframe mentally what you're telling yourself. Because most times, what we think, the way we are thinking, affects how we feel, and how we feel automatically affects our reactions or our actions. So it's important as parents that we learn to pause, choose love, change our mind, then what we're telling ourselves, change what you're telling yourself in the mind, and take the positive action. These are ways we can actually regulate ourselves emotionally. Pause, take a 10-second or 1 minute pause, label your emotion. Why am I feeling like this? Is this from a past event, or is it what my child is doing that's triggering me? Then choose love. Choose love. And when you're choosing love means that you're not going to react, rather you're going to respond. Then you need to learn to reframe what you're thinking. Then also regulate your body before your words, meaning that you take your when you're pausing, you're taking your deep breath, you're walking away, or you're you just need to do something to change your emotional state. It's very important. Now, what are the things you can tell yourself when you're in that state? You know, just tell yourself, Toyin, take a moment. Toyin, you're about getting upset. You need a minute. Toyin, you need to learn to solve this thing and not fight this thing. So there's some positive things you can actually tell yourself. Do you understand? There are some positive things you can tell yourself. When you tell yourself these positive things, it's like you reframing the negative thoughts coming to you. So instead of you saying, this child is always rude, it could be like, what is happening to my child now? Why is my child behaving the way he or she is behaving? You know, that's you reframing, having those self-talk to reframe what you're saying. And this is why empathy is also important. When you're empathetic as a parent, you will try to understand, why is my child behaving this way. Put yourself in the child's perspective. Try to see from the child's perspective. Try to respond with compassion and not with anger. And being empathetic doesn't mean you are being permissive. No. Being empathy simply means you want to understand the child, you want to connect with the child, you want to reduce deviance, you want to get the child's cooperation. And that's why empathy is very important when it comes to self-regulation. Now, how do you introduce empathy? So you're in that state, your child has done something that is getting you very, very, upset. Like I said, you need to pause, take deep breath, choose love. Choosing love is where empathy comes in. Why is my child acting this way? You need to be curious rather than judgmental. Very important. As parents, we need to be curious rather than judgmental. You need to try to enter into the child's world. Why is he acting this way? Why is she acting this way? Why does she feel she needs to talk back at me? Why is he always getting angry when I'm asking him questions? Do you understand? You need to be curious rather than judgmental. You need to try to enter into that world. You need to try to connect, because without connecting with your child, it will be difficult for you to understand. It's be difficult for you to correct or to resolve the issue. You need to connect. Okay, what is happening, and what are the scripts you tell yourself? Okay, help me to understand what is happening. I know I'm upset right now, but I need to understand, where is this coming from. Do you understand? As parents, it's very important we use both the skills of emotional regulation and empathy if you want to become emotionally intelligent. So your child has done something, or maybe your child has done something, and or your child is upset. And I've seen scenario where children are upset, and parents tell the child, "Why are you getting upset? Why should you get upset? I should be the one getting upset." But instead of that, just pause, breathe, validate the child's emotion. I can see you're upset, and we need to talk about this. But before we talk about this, we both need to calm down. Another thing you can do as parent is when you notice that you are very angry, right? Instead of you have to be deliberate about this. Instead of you opening you're opening your mouth and you want to start shouting, change your tone. Change your tone. Instead of you shouting, be deliberate, change your tone. Change your tone. Very important. Thank you so much, Faith. So parents should learn to unpack the emotional package before they start having children. Absolutely. Parents should be curious rather than judgmental. Thank you so much for being ascribed. Thank you so much. It's very important as parents. You need to learn to be curious about what is happening in your child's life. That's when using empathy, you need to be curious. You need to understand, why is this child behaving this way? This child wasn't like this last week. This child wasn't like this. So why all of a sudden he's not taking his academics serious? Why all of a sudden the child is not arranging his room? Why all of a sudden the child is not following instruction? It's very important as parents that we need to be curious and not judgmental. Now, back to my tools or strategies of becoming of regulating your emotion. I'm just going to do a recap again. Number one, I mentioned you need to learn how to pause and press the pause button. Stop what you're doing. Take in deep breath. Breathe in, breathe out. You can take yourself away from that scenario. Then number two, you need to learn to choose love. Choosing love has to do with you being empathetic with your child, deciding that I'm not going to react, rather I'm going to respond. That's you consciously choosing to respond to your child. Number three, I said that you have to learn to change the negative things you're telling yourself about the scenario. Instead of telling yourself that this boy is always, when you use words like you're always, that means you're generalizing, and you're putting yourself in a state where you get upset. So instead of telling yourself that this boy is always, you could change it to, I noticed you are not listening, you're not responding to me. I need to understand why. So choosing love and empathy. Then, and I say you need to reframe what you're saying. Instead of you telling yourself negative things, this boy is always getting me upset. This boy is always disrespecting me. This girl does never does. You reframe it. Tell yourself, my daughter needs help, or my son needs help. How can I step in to help him or her in this situation? I also mentioned that we, as parents, we need to learn to unpack our emotional backpack. I also spoke about not suppressing our emotions. I said when we suppress our emotion, it ends up, going store. It's being stored. Those negative emotions are being stored in our body and can cause physical illness. Then another thing is that when we suppress our emotions, when we don't regulate our emotion, we tend to lose control over time. I did this scenario. I painted this scenario with one of my patients. I had a bottle of Fanta on my desk. So I said, imagine this Fanta. We keep shaking it. You keep shaking it. And one day you now open it. What happens? It will just explode. And that's what happens to us when we suppress our emotion. It becomes a time whereby when you suppress your emotion, you will no longer be in control of that emotion. Your emotion becomes in control. And as parents, we have to please learn to manage our emotions effectively, learn to regulate our emotion, pause, press the pause button, take deep breath, choose love, change the negative things you're telling yourself, not negative scenarios. Change the negative things you're telling yourself and reframe those negative thoughts. Very important. Very, very important. So, as parents that are here, I always want this session to be very short. What do you have to say? Do you have questions? I'm ready here to respond to you. So it's important as parents that when we find ourselves in emotional states, that we learn to respond with empathy, we learn to regulate ourselves, we build emotional safety for ourselves, and this will also reduce the power struggles and meltdown. So as parents, if you find yourself in an emotional state, avoid reacting. Rather, press the pause button, take a step back, do your breathing exercise. Your breathing exercise will help you to calm down. Then choose love, respond with empathy, build emotional safety for yourself, reduce wanting to take charge, or wanting to be wanting to take control of the situation. No, as parents we have to learn to pause. Very important, very very important. So I'll be stopping here. If you have any questions, please, I would like you to drop them in the comment section. Yes, learn to regulate emotions as parents. Thank you so much. So another thing we can do, one of the things I love about emotional intelligence is that there's so many skills, so many things you can do to help you to manage your emotions effectively. These are just a few that I just mentioned here. For those of you who are in the group, when you go back to the group, there are a lot of things we're going to start dropping from tomorrow on how you can regulate yourself. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an awesome time with you all. Thank you, Faith. Thank you, Daniela. There's one other person that joined. Let me see. We had people that joined. They didn't drop any comment, but thank you so much all the same. And have a nice evening. Next week we'll be talking about how you can be your child's emotion coach, how you can teach your child to become emotionally intelligent. And like I keep saying, what you don't have, you can't give to your children. So it's important that you learn how to manage your emotion. So instead of you having to yell and scream at your child, you have to learn to regulate your emotion. Pause, take deep breath, choose love, change the negative things you're telling yourself, respond rather than react. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening, everyone.